Hello, I'm Robert Thompson. Welcome to Patty and Robert's YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about a simple tech setup, what you really need to work online comfortably. So this is great for a starting freelancer. So let me move out of your way, and we'll get started. So why does a simple, reliable setup matter? Well, you need to think through the work you're going to do, and you can't deliver work unless you have a setup that works with the tools you need. So let's talk a little bit about what you need to get started. Now, the first thing to do is to figure out what kind of services are you going to be providing. If you're going to be providing basic services like writing or editing, um, you can do that on a wide variety of platforms. And most new computers will be great. And you can get away with some older ones. We'll talk about a couple caveats in a minute. If you're doing something like design or graphics editing or video editing, those often require a lot more processing power. And so you'll want to think through what you're getting to do the work. If you have a tool that doesn't support the platform well enough, you may find it to be extremely slow and frustrating. Development's sort of the same thing. If you're doing a lot of heavy development, you may need a more powerful laptop, or additional monitors, or additional memory. It's a number of different considerations there. So the key to start with is figure out what you're going to be doing and what tools you need to do that. Um, When we talk about essential hardware, the first thing we think of is some type of computer, either a laptop or a desktop computer. And the performance of that really is driven by the type of work. Um, and so I work backwards. I say, what tools do I need if I'm doing Adobe Photoshop? Well, Adobe Photoshop has some specific requirements, and you want to make sure they're met. Um, so it's always good to start with the software you're going to be running on the laptop, and then you can figure out what do you need. Um, Operating system is a key choice. Um, some people love the Apple environment. Some people enjoy Windows. You don't usually use the term love when you're talking about Windows, but um, a lot of it depends on what software you're using again. Some of the software is designed for Apple, particularly graphics software, um, and it may or may not be available on Windows. The other thing you may need to consider is if you have an older computer, particularly if it's an older Windows computer, you may find that you cannot upgrade it to Windows 11, the current version of Windows. And Windows 10 is no longer supported. And as soon as you get into a non-supported operating system, you'll find that there are tools that simply don't work in that environment, or you have a security exposure that you don't want to do with the client's data. Um, in those cases, you may want to consider putting Linux on an older computer because a lot of times it works just as well. There's a little bit of a learning curve to go from Windows to Linux, but it's something a lot of people do. Now, some of the key specs to consider, RAM or memory is a big one. If you're doing basic word processing, you may be able to get by with a gig. Um, but if you're doing development or graphics, you probably want at least 12 or 16 gig. Um, and I've seen, people who are doing a lot of heavy work. needing to upgrade that to 32 gig. And there's two things to consider with RAM is one is what does it come with, and the other is what's the maximum. Most devices can be upgraded, except for some cell phones, and you can then get more RAM, but depending on the device type, it may or may not be able to support the amount of RAM that you want. Storage is another consideration. This is your disk, what we used to call a hard drive, and now most of the hard drives are really solid state devices or SSDs. Um, a couple things to think about. One, most SSDs are smaller because they're more expensive at the high volumes, um, and they're much faster. So it's a lot easier to work with them, and most new computers come with them. Um, but they tend to lose things after a while. They begin to fail, and so a lot of times people will have an SSD and then an external hard drive or a dual drive machine. One's a hard drive and one's a software solid state drive. Um, so again, the amount of storage will depend on what you're creating. If you're creating lots of large videos, you'll need more. The other thing there is, do you have a cloud service that you use? Now, remember, your local copy of the cloud information's still stored on your disk, but if you're doing a lot of work over time and you start moving things off onto the cloud, you don't necessarily have to have the same amount of space allocated. The last spec is the processor, and most of the modern processors, um, keep up. And really, it's a matter of time. How long does a processor last? If you get a processor that's slower, um, the software is going to require faster and faster processors over time, and eventually, you won't be able to continue using that device. Another thing to consider is the ability to upgrade. Some types of devices don't have upgrades. I mentioned cell phones don't let you upgrade the memory, for instance, they're soldered in place. Um, but most desktops and laptops will allow you to upgrade some of the basic stuff, the drives and the memory, and in some cases, the processor. Uh, Accessories to consider. One is the display. The display size is a big one. If you're doing a lot of traveling, a smaller one is nice. But if you're doing a lot of work where you have multiple windows and you need to look from window to window, a small screen is almost impossible to use. Um, and a low resolution screen means you can't get more information on there. If you have a screen that's higher resolution, even though it may only be a 14 or 15-inch screen, you can put a lot more information on there. For older people, that may be a problem because even though you can get it at a higher resolution, you may not be able to read it at that higher resolution. Um, the other thing to consider is dual monitors. And actually, I've had setups where I've had three monitors. Um, and what a dual monitor does is let you um, have one screen, often that's bigger than you might have on a laptop. So you might have a smaller laptop screen, and then you have a big um, monitor that allows you to do the detailed work at home at your desk. Keyboard and mouse, these are generally done based on comfort. One consideration here is if you're doing a lot of traveling, you may want to have a wireless mouse or a wireless keyboard. If you're doing work at a desk, wired may be just fine. So you need to think about how often you're going to be traveling. Audio and video, I'll talk a little more about some of these, but some people love headsets. Others like to use earbuds, or you can just use a traditional speaker. The nice thing about headsets and earbuds is you don't get as much interference with the microphone. If you have a quality microphone and a speaker, generally the microphone will be able to um, get rid of any background noise from the speaker. However, if you're using the microphone on your laptop, having a headset or earbuds will help a lot in the audio quality because it's not competing with the sound from the speaker. Um, and uh, you need a microphone. Uh, most laptops come with a microphone. The quality um, may or may not be good enough. Same thing is true of the webcam. If you're just doing an occasional meeting, the webcam on a laptop is probably going to be great. If you're doing presentations, you probably want a webcam that's external with a much higher resolution. And you probably will want a microphone that's external as well. Internet is a big thing. And again, this becomes a big issue if you're traveling. Um, I did a presentation a few weeks ago on basic network terminology, and you can look at that if you want a lot more detail on these. But types of connections, um, Wi-Fi versus wired, most of the time now, uh, most devices work fine on Wi-Fi, especially 5G, 6G. Um, the only thing you might want to consider there is sometimes the Wi-Fi comes in with a condo and you're actually on a shared Wi-Fi, um, and you may or may not be able to secure it. So if you can't secure it, wired is definitely more secure. Now, when you're buying your service, you need to consider the type of connection there too. Um, Traditional cable systems are probably the most ubiquitous, and they work fine in most cases. Um, we found they're generally lower speed and not quite as reliable as fiber. Um, we found here in Panama that they tend not to change the batteries on the routers that are up on the poles. And so, as long as you have power, they work great. And then you lose power and they last for like 30 seconds and then die because the battery backup fails. Um, so, that's a consideration. Fiber actually has power that is run with the fiber rather, and it goes all the way from the home office where they have a backup generator. So that'll work. And this is important. Like if you have your own home solar or your own home generator and you live in an area where power goes out often, you'll switch to that generator only to find if you're on a cable that you don't have any internet anyway. Satellite is another option. We used Starlink for a while, and we're pretty satisfied with it. The only problem we found with Starlink is whenever we had a big storm, which we have lots of big storms in Panama, it would knock the satellite out for a half an hour or so. And so that got to be frustrating when you suddenly lost your ability to do a call. We're now using fiber um, because it gives us the best service. Um, Especially if you have cable or satellite, you might want to consider a backup like a hotspot or phone tethering. Um, we we have that, and I do use it occasionally if we lose um, our network. Speed Again, depends on what you're doing. If you're doing a lot of heavy video interaction, you might require higher speed. Or if your household has 5 TVs that are often in use and you want to do video conferencing, you may not have enough speed if you're just on a basic 200 meg cable connection. Um, if you're on a 1 gig fiber, you're not going to have that problem. Another connectivity thing to consider, especially if you're a road warrior, if you're a traveling freelancer, is your VPN. Um, I wouldn't leave the country without a VPN. It lets me make sure that I connect back to my home office. So that's something to look at. And again, we did have a video on that a few weeks ago. Um, Workspace and ergonomics. Um, you want to have a desk and chair that's comfortable. You don't want to find that it's really hard to do the work, and you don't want to do it because it's not comfortable. Um, and most desks and chairs nowadays are pretty good. Um, but if you buy a real old one, you may have a problem. Noise is another consideration depending on where you work. If there's a lot of noise in the background or barking dogs or kids, that can be a problem. So find a place where there's not a lot of noise. And then the last thing is think about the background. You don't want to have a bunch of clutter behind your head when you're working. Um, in my case, what I did is I just painted the wall behind my desk, and then I do a graphic. So the the graphic behind me is actually of a mountain next door here, and so I use that. So that's something you can do as well. Um, Power and accessories, as soon as you start to get a desk set up, you realize you need some power strips and you probably need an extender for your USB ports. And pretty soon you have cables all over the place. So you may want to consider cable management to keep it agreeable to work in. Let's put it that way. Um, Core software tools. You're going to need some communication tools, email, chat, and some video meeting tool. A lot of these come with the basic freelancing platform. And so if you're just working on a platform, you may not need it. If you're doing a lot of work off platform, you may need a tool like Zoom for video. Um, and of course, you're going to want to have your email. Um, Project and task management. A lot of stuff that you can do to manage your projects can be done like in Excel with templates that you can find online for a reasonable price. If you're really getting heavy into projects that are complex, um, or keeping track of a lot of different projects going on at the same time, you may want to look at investing in a tool. There are some dedicated tools for freelancers, like HubSpot was one we looked at. Um, so it depends on how many clients you're going to have and how much work you're actually doing. File storage and backup, you probably want to have some type of backup tool. Um, we use a tool called Dropbox to share our information between Patty and I. Because the two of us work together, we want to have a shared storage, so that's worthwhile. Having a backup, separate backup is important, especially if you're using an SSD, because, as I said, SSDs work great when they work and then they don't. Um, you may also want to think about a standard for version control if you're doing a number of different projects with a number of different clients. You want to know what version was what, and you don't want to say, oops, I just overwrote my backup. So, because sometimes clients will want to go back and see the previous version. Security tools, you should consider a password manager. I mean, in this day and age, you need to have fairly complex passwords, especially if you're taking responsibility for client information. Um, there are free password managers that work fine. We used KeePass for years and still use it as our backup. Um, but some of the paid tools work a lot better. We went with NordPass not long ago. LastPass has a free and a paid version, so a number of different options there. But whatever one you get, you want it to be able to support two-factor authentication. Um, and passkeys is a new big thing, and there's a video I did not long ago on that as well. But it's getting pushed heavily by vendors, partially because they feel it's more secure. And so if you're buying a new password manager, you want to make sure it has support for that. Antivirus, you used to always buy a separate antivirus package, McAfee or Norton. In all honesty, the built-in ones that are now provided with the primary operating systems generally are as good as the paid ones. So I really don't recommend a paid antivirus unless you're dealing with a lot of sketchy files and stuff. System updates, you do want to make sure you accept updates because they're constantly releasing um, new versions of software, what they call zero-day exploits. Um, so, because the hackers are constantly changing, you really need to have your system updates turned on and set to automatic. Financial management tools, a lot of people don't think about this when they're starting freelancing. But the fact is, you're starting your own business and you're a business person now. So you need to consider some financial issues. Expense tracking, you're going to need, and tax reporting, you're definitely going to need for any freelancer. Um, you may need payment processing. This is built into tools like Upwork. But if you don't use Upwork, you may need a separate payment processing tool. Um, the freelance platforms all provide tools that cover the basics, so especially expenses that are related to the platform, they will cover, but they're not going to keep track of any other tools that you get that are outside of that platform. So, it's really a matter, will all your work be done on the platform? Um, and even if it's not, you can use the tools on the platform, like to download all the transactions that were done on the platform for a year when you're doing your annual tax reporting. Uh, Automation time savers. I mentioned earlier, you can buy templates that are good for a lot of things. Um, there are tools that will do more. Video conferencing. The platforms all have some type of video conferencing, but you may need a paid video conferencing subscription if you're doing work off platform. Scheduling, if you're scheduling clients, again, if you're working on a platform, you can do it through the platform. If not, you'll probably need some type of calendaring tool. So some nice to have upgrades. A second monitor is great. A quality microphone really makes you sound better and more professional. Lighting is a big thing. I actually was a lighting designer in college for theater, and it makes a big difference in how you come across. Um, so you don't want to be working in a dark corner. Uh, you'll look grainy, the quality will be bad. So you want to have some decent lighting. And you, depending on your age and how good your back is, you may want to consider something like a standing desk or some other ergonomic extras that make your job a little easier. So, summary, basically you need a computer and then everything else is based on what you're doing. Um, you want to focus on being comfortable because if you're not comfortable, you're not going to want to work. And with freelancing, you don't want anything to stand in the way of you wanting to work. Um, and you want to think about reliability and sustainability. Um, you want to be able to upgrade to new versions and stuff like that. So you don't want to get something that's um, works now, but then you have to replace in 6 months. And you want to start with the basics. It's always easier to add some capabilities. There are some things like the tech specs for your laptop that are harder to upgrade. There's others like just buying a tool that's a lot easier to do later. So um, get your tools and get to work. So check out our next video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you need coaching, contact us at info@rptvirtualservices.com. That's Robert and Patty Thompson, virtualservices.com. And follow our blog on our website with the same name, www.rptvirtualservices.com. And have a great week.